My boyfriend thinks we're losing our V-cards together, but I gave up my baby for adoption when I was 16. Weston planned everything for next weekend. He booked this cute bed and breakfast in the mountains and even made a playlist called Our Special Night that he accidentally showed me on his phone. He gets this dopey smile whenever he talks about how we're waiting for the perfect moment to share this experience together. I just smile back and die a little inside. We met at a bookstore coffee shop 8 months ago. He was reading some philosophy book and I made a joke about Nietzsche that made him laugh so hard he spilled his latte. When he asked about my past relationships, I told him I'd been focused on school and never found the right person. He lit up and said he was the same way. He actually used the word soulmates on our third date. Weston is 23 and still believes in all the romantic movie stuff. He writes me actual letters and plans elaborate dates based on inside jokes. Last month he spent hours learning to cook my favorite childhood meal because I mentioned missing it. He's the kind of guy who would have been perfect if I'd met him 4 years ago, before everything. The baby thing happened when I was 16. His name was Sammy and I only held him for 10 minutes before the nurses took him to his adoptive parents. I picked them from a binder full of profiles. They seemed nice and had a golden retriever. Sometimes I wonder if he likes dogs too or if he got my allergies instead. The adoption was closed, so I'll probably never know. My mom helped me hide the pregnancy from everyone at school. I wore baggy hoodies and said I was just stress eating from AP exams. After Sammy was born, I transferred schools and deleted all my social media. Started fresh as the quiet girl who studied too much and didn't date. It was easier than explaining where I'd been for a month or why I still had to pump breast milk in the bathroom between classes. Weston started hinting about taking things further after we'd been dating 6 months. He'd pull away from making out and joke about cold showers. I played along with being shy and wanting to wait for the right moment. He thought it was sweet that we were both so nervous about our first time. He actually said he was glad we could figure it out together without any pressure or expectations. The guilt got worse when I met his family. His mom pulled me aside at Thanksgiving and thanked me for being such a good influence on Weston. She said his last girlfriend pressured him about clapping cheeks, and she was so happy he found someone who respected his boundaries. I nodded and helped her make pie while thinking about my stretch marks and the way my hips got wider after giving birth. Everything started falling apart last month. Weston's sister had a baby and we went to visit her in the hospital. Watching him hold his nephew made my chest tight. He was so gentle and kept looking at me with this soft expression. Later he talked about how amazing it was that our kids would have cousins close in age. He had our whole future mapped out and I couldn't breathe. The lies kept building. When his roommate made jokes about virgin nerves, I laughed along. When Weston asked if I wanted to go on birth control before our trip, I pretended to be embarrassed about making a doctor's appointment. When he showed me articles about making the first time special, I acted like I was reading them for the first time. Each lie felt like adding another brick to a wall between us. I almost told him once. We were watching some movie where the girl lies about her past, and Weston went on this rant about how honesty was everything in a relationship. He said he could forgive anything except being lied to about something important. Then he kissed me and said he was so lucky to have someone who understood that. I spent that night crying in my car outside his apartment. My therapist kept telling me I needed to be honest, but she didn't understand. Weston wasn't just some guy. He was the first person who made me feel like maybe I could be more than just the girl who gave up her baby. He looked at me like I was special and pure and worth waiting for. Telling him the truth would ruin everything we had. 2 weeks ago, it got more complicated. Weston started planning our weekend trip and wanted everything to be perfect. He researched the best rooms and read reviews about which bed and breakfast had the comfiest beds. He even asked my ring size while pretending it was for his sister. I knew he was thinking about proposing after we slept together, making it this whole pure commitment thing. Then I ran into Sammy's adoptive mom at Target. I recognized her from the photos they sent the first year before I asked them to stop. She had him with her, and he was 3 years old with my exact nose and his birth father's black hair. He was picking out a toy dinosaur and making roaring sounds. She didn't recognize me, but I hid in the bathroom and threw up. That night, Weston noticed I was quiet and made my favorite dinner. He kept asking if I was okay, and I said I was just stressed about work. He suggested we move our trip up to help me relax. The way he was so concerned and caring made everything worse. He had no idea he was comforting me about the son I gave away. I started pulling back physically to buy more time. I told Weston I wanted our first time to be really special and not rushed. He agreed immediately and said he loved how much this meant to me. He started researching romantic gestures and asking his coupled friends for advice. His browser history was full of articles about how to make your partner comfortable and what to expect the first time. Yesterday, everything almost came out. We were at his place and he was showing me the bed and breakfast website. He'd booked the honeymoon suite with a jacuzzi and champagne. Then he pulled out a notebook where he'd been writing down ideas to make me feel safe and loved. The last line said, "Remind her that sharing this together makes it more special." I started crying and couldn't stop. Weston held me and kept asking what was wrong. He said we could wait longer if I wasn't ready. He said there was no pressure and he just wanted me to be happy. The more understanding he was, the harder I cried. He probably thought I was overwhelmed by how romantic everything was. He had no idea I was mourning the moment he was so excited about. "I need to tell you something," I finally whispered. He pulled back to look at me with these concerned eyes. He pushed my hair behind my ear and said I could tell him anything. He said nothing would change how he felt about me. He believed it too because in his mind, the worst thing I could say was that I'd kissed someone before him. My phone rang before I could speak. It was my mom and I almost didn't answer, but Weston insisted I take it. She was crying and told me Sammy's adoptive parents had reached out. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to share medical history because he needed some tests done. Nothing serious, but they thought I should know. I hung up and Weston asked if everything was okay with my mom. I nodded and said I needed to go home. He offered to drive me, but I said I needed space. As I was leaving, he grabbed my hand and reminded me about our trip next weekend. He said he couldn't wait to share that experience with me. I sat in my car for an hour trying to figure out how to tell him. How do you explain to someone that the moment they've built up in their head already happened years ago in a hospital room where you gave birth to a child they don't know exists? How do you tell them that their romantic playlist will be playing while you pretend something that stopped being true before you met them? This morning, Weston texted me a countdown. 5 days until we take the next step in our journey together with about 15 heart emojis. Then another text came through that stopped my heart. My mom wants to have a private lunch with you tomorrow. She says she has something important to discuss about my future with you. I stared at my phone screen until the words blurred together. Weston's mom wanted to talk about his future with me. My hand started shaking so bad I dropped the phone on my bedroom floor. She knew. She had to know. Maybe she hired someone to look into my past, or maybe someone from my old school recognized me. I picked up the phone and texted Weston back that I'd be there. He sent back 20 heart emojis and said his mom made reservations at this fancy Italian place downtown. I spent the whole morning throwing up and trying on different outfits that might make me look more innocent. Nothing worked because you can't dress away stretch marks and wider hips. The restaurant was one of those places with cloth napkins and a waiter who explains every ingredient. Weston's mom was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with perfect posture and her pearls. She stood up and hugged me, which made it worse. She smelled like expensive perfume and motherhood. The waiter brought bread and she ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. She talked about the weather and asked about my classes while I tried not to throw up the water I was sipping. Then she pulled out a small velvet box from her purse and my whole body went cold. She opened it and inside was this delicate gold bracelet with a tiny heart charm. She said it was a family heirloom that Weston's grandmother wore on her wedding day. She wanted me to have it because she knew Weston was planning something special on our trip. She said she'd never seen her son so happy and certain about someone. She talked about how pure our relationship was and how refreshing it was to see young people taking things slow. She mentioned that Weston told her we were both waiting for marriage, which wasn't even what we'd said, but he must have implied it to make her happy. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand and said she was so grateful I came into Weston's life when I did. She said his ex had been pressuring him and making him feel bad about his values. She actually used the word values like we were in some religious movie. She said she could tell I was different just by looking at me. She said I had this innocence about me that reminded her of herself at my age. I wanted to laugh, but it came out as this weird choking sound. She thought I was getting emotional about the bracelet and squeezed my hand harder. She started talking about her own wedding night and how special it was to share that with someone you truly loved. She said Weston's dad was her first and only, and they'd been married 32 years. She said she knew we'd have the same kind of marriage built on trust and patience. The waiter brought our food, but I couldn't eat. She kept talking about wedding plans and grandchildren and how she'd already started knitting baby blankets just in case. She said she knew we weren't even engaged yet, but she could tell when something was meant to be. She showed me pictures on her phone of wedding venues she'd been researching. She had a whole folder labeled with my name and Weston's. She'd even picked out flowers that would match my complexion. She said she hoped I didn't mind her getting ahead of herself, but she'd been praying for Weston to find someone like me for years. She actually said praying like this was all part of some divine plan. She told me about Weston as a kid and how sensitive he'd always been. She said he wrote poetry in middle school about finding his soulmate. She said he used to practice proposal speeches in the mirror when he was 15. She said he'd been saving himself for the right person since he made that decision in youth group. Youth group. Weston went to youth group and made purity pledges. She pulled out her phone again and showed me a picture of teenage Weston at some church camp holding a certificate about abstinence. He looked so young and serious and convinced he had everything figured out. She said he still had that certificate in his desk drawer. She said he showed it to her last week and said he was glad he'd waited for me. The bracelet felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds on my wrist. She insisted on putting it on me right there in the restaurant. She said it was perfect because it was a little loose, just like it had been on Weston's grandmother. She said that meant I'd grow into it when I got pregnant. When, not if. She already had our whole life planned out. She paid for lunch and hugged me again outside the restaurant. She whispered that she was so happy Weston found someone pure and honest. She said she knew I'd never hurt him or lie to him about anything important. She said she could see it in my eyes that I was exactly who I seemed to be. She said Weston was lucky to have found someone who understood that some things were worth waiting for. She said she'd see me at Sunday dinner, and maybe we could start planning the wedding, since she knew it was coming soon. She winked when she said soon, like we had this secret understanding about what would happen after our trip. She drove away in her white SUV with the stick figure family on the back window. I sat in my car staring at the bracelet and thinking about how much it would destroy her to know the truth. Her perfect son's perfect girlfriend who already gave away a baby. Her future daughter-in-law who knew exactly what it felt like to push a human out of her body. Her pure, innocent angel who had stretch marks and milk that dried up 3 years ago. I drove home with the bracelet burning against my skin, like it knew I didn't deserve it. My apartment felt smaller when I walked in and saw Weston's stuff everywhere. His toothbrush next to mine in the bathroom. His favorite coffee mug on my kitchen counter. The sweatshirt he left draped over my couch that still smelled like his cologne. I pulled off the bracelet and set it on my dresser next to the ultrasound photo I kept hidden in my jewelry box. The one from when Sammy was 20 weeks and you could see his little nose already looking like mine. I sat on my bed and opened my laptop to look up how to tell someone about a closed adoption. Every article said to be honest early in the relationship before feelings got too deep. Too late for that advice. My phone buzzed with a text from Weston asking how lunch went with his mom. I typed and deleted 20 different responses before settling on a thumbs up emoji. He sent back hearts and said he couldn't wait to hear all about it at dinner. We had reservations at 7 at this Thai place we went on our second date, the same place where he told me about wanting to wait for someone special. I pulled out the medical history form Sammy's parents had emailed through the adoption agency. Basic stuff about allergies and family medical conditions. Nothing that required contact, but seeing the forms made him real again in a way that hurt. I filled them out while thinking about how Weston would react if he knew I was doing this. The forms asked about the birth father, and I had to write that I didn't have current contact. His name was Giovanni, and he was 17 when it happened. Last I heard, he was in the military somewhere. He never even knew Sammy existed because I moved before I started showing. I took a shower and tried to wash off the feeling of Weston's mom's perfume. The stretch marks on my stomach looked darker under the bathroom lights. I traced them with my finger and remembered how bad they itched when my skin was stretching to make room for Sammy. Weston had kissed my stomach once and asked about them. I said they were from gaining and losing weight in high school. Another lie added to the pile. I got dressed for dinner in the blue dress Weston bought me for my birthday. It was modest and sweet. Exactly what someone's first girlfriend would wear. I put the bracelet back on because he'd notice if I didn't wear it. My hands shook as I applied mascara and I had to redo it twice. The drive to the restaurant took 20 minutes and I practiced what I might say. Every version sounded worse than the last. How do you tell someone who thinks you're pure that you've already been through labor and delivery? That you know what contractions feel like and how it feels when your water breaks? That you've had stitches in places he's never even seen? Weston was already at the restaurant when I arrived, sitting at our usual table by the window. He stood up and kissed my cheek and pulled out my chair like he always did. He noticed the bracelet immediately and his whole face lit up. He grabbed my hand and ran his thumb over the gold heart charm. He said his mom texted him that lunch went amazing and she absolutely loved me. He said she was already planning our wedding in her head. He laughed like it was funny, but his eyes were serious. The waiter brought our usual order without us even asking. Weston had called ahead to make sure everything was perfect. He kept touching the bracelet and talking about how his grandmother would have loved me. He said she was traditional too and waited for his grandfather. He said some things were worth being patient for. I pushed pad thai around my plate and tried to look happy. Weston asked if I was feeling okay, and I said I was just tired from work. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and said only 4 more days until our trip. He said he'd been reading about how to make everything perfect and comfortable. He actually used the word perfect 3 times in one sentence. He mentioned that he'd bought special sheets with a high thread count because he read that soft textures helped with nerves. He'd researched everything from room temperature to lighting to music. He showed me a screenshot on his phone of a playlist he was refining. All slow romantic songs that would make me want to cry even without the lying. He asked if I wanted to add any songs that were meaningful to me. I shook my head because all my meaningful songs were from when I was pregnant. The stuff I listened to while Sammy kicked inside me. Weston paid the check and suggested we go for a walk in the park nearby. He held my hand and talked about his day at work while I tried to focus on breathing normally. He mentioned his coworker just had a baby and brought pictures to the office. He said the baby was cute, but he bet ours would be cuter. Ours? Like it was already decided. Like my body hadn't already done that with someone else's baby. We sat on a bench and watched ducks swim in the pond. Weston put his arm around me and pulled me close. He kissed the top of my head and said he felt like the luckiest guy in the world. He said most guys had to deal with complicated pasts and jealousy, but we got to discover everything together. He said it was like the universe saved us for each other. The ducks had babies following them in a line, and Weston made a joke about practicing for our future. I stood up and said I needed to use the bathroom. I walked to the public restroom and threw up as quietly as possible. When I came back, Weston looked concerned and felt my forehead for fever. He insisted on driving me home and tucking me into bed. He made me tea and sat on the edge of my bed stroking my hair. He whispered that he hoped I felt better for our trip. He said he wanted everything to be perfect for our first time. There was that word again. Perfect. He kissed my forehead and said he'd let himself out so I could rest. I heard him doing my dishes in the kitchen before he left. Even when I was lying to him, he was taking care of me. After he left, I called my mom and told her about the bracelet. She said I needed to tell him before the trip, or I'd never forgive myself. She said lies like this destroyed relationships. She said she'd been through it with my dad when she hit her credit card debt. I reminded her that debt and a secret baby were different levels of lying. She went quiet, and then said Sammy's parents had sent her a photo from his recent birthday party. She asked if I wanted to see it, but I said no. Seeing him at Target was enough pain for one lifetime. I hung up and stared at the ceiling thinking about the weekend. 3 days from now, I'd be in that honeymoon suite pretending to be nervous about something I'd already experienced. Weston would be gentle and patient and probably ask permission for everything. He'd whisper that he loved me and that he was so happy we waited. He'd have no idea that my body had already been through more than he could imagine. That I'd already had someone inside me for 9 months. Just not the way he thought. My phone buzzed with a text from Weston saying he made it home safe and he loved me. He added that his mom wanted to have us over for dinner tomorrow to celebrate giving me the bracelet. He said his whole family would be there, including his sister with the new baby. He said they were all so excited to welcome me officially to the family. I texted back that I'd be there and added a heart emoji that felt like a lie. I got up and looked at myself in the mirror. The girl staring back didn't look like someone who'd given birth at 16. She looked like someone's innocent girlfriend who wore cardigans and read books at coffee shops. She looked like the person Weston thought he was dating. The person his mom thought was perfect for her son. The person who didn't exist. I opened my laptop again and pulled up the adoption agency website. There was a section about birth mothers and their rights, about how closed adoptions worked and what information could be shared, about how birth mothers often struggled with relationships after placement. They had support groups and counseling services. They had resources for telling partners about past adoptions. I bookmarked the page and closed the laptop. Tomorrow, I'd have dinner with Weston's family and pretend to be excited about our future. I'd sit next to his sister and hold her baby while my chest ached for the one I gave away. I'd let his mom talk about wedding plans and grandchildren while wearing her family bracelet. I'd smile and nod and add another day of lies to the pile. 3 more days until the trip. 3 more days to figure out how to tell him or decide to live with the secret forever. 3 more days of being the girl he thought he fell in love with. 3 more days before everything would change one way or another. The next morning, I drove to Weston's parents' house with the bracelet burning against my wrist and my stomach in knots. Their driveway was full of cars, which meant his whole family was already there, including his sister with the baby. I sat in my car for 5 minutes practicing my smile in the mirror before walking to the front door. Weston opened it before I could knock and pulled me into a hug that lasted too long while his family watched from the living room. His sister was on the couch breastfeeding her newborn, and the sight made my chest ache with phantom milk letdown that hadn't happened in 3 years. His mom rushed over and grabbed my wrist to show everyone the bracelet while telling the story of how his grandmother wore it on her wedding day. His dad shook my hand and said he'd never seen Weston, so happy, which made the guilt sit heavier in my stomach. The baby started crying, and his sister asked if I wanted to hold him while she fixed her shirt. I took the baby, and my body remembered exactly how to bounce and sway to calm him down. Weston watched me with this soft look and said I was a natural, which made his mom start talking about grandchildren again. His sister said her son would need cousins close in age to play with, and everyone looked at us like our future was already decided. I handed the baby back when my arms started shaking and excused myself to the bathroom, where I gripped the sink and tried not to throw up. When I came back out, they were passing around photo albums from when Weston was little. His mom pointed to a picture of teenage Weston at church camp and told the story of his purity pledge, while he turned red and tried to change the subject. His sister made a joke about him finally getting to cash in that pledge next weekend, and everyone laughed while I forced myself to smile. Dinner was this huge spread with all of Weston's favorite foods that his mom had spent all day making. She sat me next to Weston and kept refilling my plate even though I could barely eat anything. His dad asked about my family, and I gave the same vague answers I always did about my mom being busy with work. His sister's baby started fussing during dessert, and she mentioned how hard the first few months were with no sleep and constant feeding. I nodded like I was imagining it instead of remembering my own raw nipples, and the way Sammy would only sleep on my chest. Weston squeezed my hand under the table and whispered that we'd be doing this ourselves someday, which made me excuse myself to help his mom with dishes. She talked the whole time about wedding venues she'd researched and how she'd already put deposits down on 3 different dates just in case. She showed me her phone with a whole Pinterest board labeled with our names full of flower arrangements and cake designs. She said she knew we weren't engaged yet, but she could tell it was coming soon, especially after our special weekend. The way she winked when she said special made me drop the plate I was drying, and it shattered on the floor. Everyone rushed in to help clean up while I apologized over and over with tears in my eyes that they thought were about the broken dish. Weston's sister made a joke about wedding jitters, and everyone laughed again while I picked up ceramic pieces with shaking hands. After dinner, Weston walked me to my car and kissed me goodbye while his family watched from the window. He reminded me about our trip in 2 days and said he'd added more songs to the playlist, including one his mom suggested from her own wedding. He said his whole family loved me and couldn't wait to officially welcome me to the family, which he said with this meaningful look that made it clear he was thinking about proposing. I drove home and found 3 missed calls from my mom, and a voicemail saying Sammy's medical test came back fine, but his parents wanted to know if there was any history of allergies in our family. I called her back and we went through the medical history forms together while I tried not to think about how Weston would react if he knew what I was doing. She asked again if I was going to tell him before the trip, and I said I didn't know how. She reminded me that lies this big always come out eventually, and it would be better if he heard it from me. After we hung up, I sat on my bed staring at the forms asking about pregnancy complications and delivery details. I'd had 18 hours of labor and needed stitches after Sammy was born. My milk came in 3 days later, and I had to pump and dump for 2 weeks before it finally dried up. These were things Weston would notice when he saw my body for the first time if he knew what to look for. The stretch marks could be explained away, but the other changes were harder to hide. I opened my laptop and looked up what men notice during their first time, and most articles said they're too nervous to notice much of anything. But Weston had been researching and preparing and making lists about how to make everything perfect. He'd probably memorized every article about what to expect, which made me close the laptop and try not to panic. My phone buzzed with a text from him saying he'd just bought special massage oil that was supposed to help with relaxation, and he hoped I liked lavender. Another text came through with a picture of rose petals he'd ordered for the bed, because he read that small romantic touches helped with nerves. He was trying so hard to make everything perfect for something that couldn't exist the way he imagined it. I texted back that everything sounded wonderful and added heart emojis that felt like lies. Tomorrow was Thursday, which meant one more day before we'd leave for the mountains. One more day to figure out if I could go through with pretending, or if I needed to tell him the truth and watch everything we'd built shatter. Thursday morning, I woke up at 4 and couldn't get back to sleep. I kept thinking about what to pack for a trip where I'd pretend to lose something I lost 3 years ago. My phone showed 12 texts from Weston about restaurant reservations and hiking trails, and whether I preferred red or white wine with dinner. I typed back that anything was fine and then deleted my search history about how to fake being nervous during sex. The adoption agency called while I was getting dressed and asked if I could provide more detailed medical history about allergies since Sammy's tests showed some sensitivities. I sat on my bathroom floor filling out forms about my family's medical conditions, while Weston texted me pictures of the sunset from the mountain view we'd have from our room. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I wrote down that my grandmother had severe peanut allergies and my dad's side had asthma. These were things Sammy's parents needed to know, but Weston never would unless I told him about the baby that existed before we met. I drove to work and tried to focus on spreadsheets, but kept thinking about how Weston bought special sheets with high thread count because he read that comfort helped with first-time nerves. My coworker asked if I was okay, and I said I had a headache, which wasn't really a lie since my head had been pounding for days. During lunch, I sat in my car and called my mom, who said I needed to tell him tonight before things went any further. She reminded me that secrets this big always come out, and it would be worse if he found out from someone else later. I told her nobody else knew except her and my therapist, but she said life had a way of revealing things when you least expected it. After work, I went to Weston's apartment where he was cooking dinner and playing the playlist he'd made for our trip. Every song was about new beginnings and taking chances and sharing special moments, which made me want to throw up the salad I was pretending to eat. He showed me the new hiking boots he bought for our morning walk on Saturday and said he wanted to watch the sunrise together after our first night as a real couple. The way he said real couple made it clear he thought everything before was just practice for what would happen this weekend. I helped him wash dishes while he talked about how his mom kept texting him advice about making me comfortable and taking things slow. He laughed about how she sent him an article about the importance of emotional connection before physical intimacy, like he was still 15. I dropped a glass and it shattered on his kitchen floor, and we both got down to clean it up, and our hands touched, reaching for the same piece. He pulled me close and kissed me and whispered that tomorrow night we'd finally get to share everything with each other. The word everything sat heavy between us because he had no idea what everything actually meant in my case. I left his apartment early saying I needed to pack, and he walked me to my car with his hand on my lower back, right where I used to feel Sammy kicking. At home, I pulled out my suitcase and stared at the lingerie I'd bought last week, because that's what someone would buy for their first time. The tags were still on the white lace set that cost more than I usually spent on groceries, because I thought expensive underwear might make the lie feel less obvious. I tried it on and looked at myself in the mirror and could see the faint stretch marks across my stomach and hips that no amount of expensive lace could hide. The C-section scar was barely visible now, but I knew Weston would ask about it if he noticed, because he noticed everything about me. I took off the lingerie and put on my oldest pajamas and sat on my bed with my laptop looking up how to tell your partner about a closed adoption. Every article said the same thing about honesty being essential, and how partners deserve to know about something this significant. One woman wrote about how her husband left her when he found out she'd hidden a previous pregnancy for 2 years of marriage. Another wrote about how her boyfriend was more hurt by the lying than the actual adoption, and how they needed months of therapy to rebuild trust. I closed the laptop and picked up my phone to text Weston that we needed to talk before the trip. I typed the message 20 times but couldn't hit send, because once I started that conversation, everything would change. My mom called again and asked if I'd told him yet, and I said I was going to, but couldn't find the right words. She said there were no right words for something like this, and I just needed to be honest about what happened and hope he could understand. She reminded me that if he really loved me, he'd find a way to work through it, but we both knew love didn't always survive betrayal this big. I hung up and looked at the forms from the adoption agency, asking about mental health history in our family. Another thing Sammy might need to know that I'd have to hide from Weston, or explain why I was filling out medical forms for a child he didn't know existed. The lies kept multiplying, and each one made it harder to imagine telling the truth. My phone buzzed with a text from Weston saying he loved me and couldn't wait for our adventure tomorrow, and my chest got so tight I could barely breathe. Friday morning came too fast, and I spent 20 minutes in my car outside the restaurant where Weston's mom wanted to meet. The parking lot was half empty, which meant we'd have privacy for whatever she wanted to discuss about her son's future with me. I walked inside and found her already waiting at a corner booth with 2 glasses of water and a nervous smile that looked too much like Weston's. She stood up and hugged me tight, and the bracelet on my wrist pressed against her back. She ordered us both salads without asking what I wanted, and started talking about how happy Weston had been lately. She said she'd never seen him so excited about anything, and she knew the trip this weekend was a big step for us. The way she kept touching my hand made my stomach hurt. She pulled out her phone and showed me pictures from Weston's childhood, pointing out how shy he'd always been with girls. She mentioned his high school girlfriend who broke up with him because he wouldn't sleep with her before he was ready. She said she was so grateful he found someone who understood that physical stuff should mean something special. The waiter brought our salads, and I pushed lettuce around my plate while she talked about wedding venues she'd been researching. She showed me a spreadsheet on her phone with different dates and locations and asked if I had any family traditions she should know about. I told her my family was small and simple, and she said that was perfect because Weston preferred intimate gatherings anyway. She mentioned her mother's wedding dress was still in storage if I wanted to try it on sometime. The thought of wearing his grandmother's dress while hiding such a huge secret made me excuse myself to the bathroom. I stood at the sink running cold water over my wrists and trying not to throw up. When I came back, she'd ordered dessert and was talking to the waiter about her son's upcoming special weekend. She winked at me when she said special, and I forced myself to smile back. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped box and slid it across the table. Inside was a silver necklace with a heart charm that matched the bracelet. She said it was for after our weekend together, to commemorate the moment we truly became a couple. She actually used the word commemorate like this was some historical event. I put the necklace on because she was watching and waiting, and the chain felt tight around my throat. She paid the check and walked me to my car and hugged me again and whispered that she was so happy Weston waited for the right person. I drove straight home and called in sick to work for the afternoon. My boss sounded annoyed, but I couldn't sit at a desk pretending everything was normal. I laid on my couch staring at the ceiling and thinking about how many people I was lying to now. Weston texted asking how lunch went, and I sent back a heart emoji because I couldn't find words. He replied with a countdown saying only 18 hours until we left for our trip. My mom called and asked if I'd told him yet, and I said I tried but couldn't. She said waiting would only make it worse, but she didn't understand that telling him would end everything. My therapist had an opening that afternoon, but I didn't go because she'd just tell me the same thing about honesty. I spent the rest of the day packing and unpacking my suitcase, trying different combinations of clothes that might make me look like someone who'd never done this before. The white lingerie still had tags on it, and I couldn't decide if wearing it would make the lie better or worse. Weston texted again with a weather update for the mountains and a reminder to bring a warm jacket for our sunrise hike. He'd planned every detail, including which trails had the best views and where we could stop for breakfast after. That night, I barely slept, going over different ways to tell him the truth. Every scenario ended with him leaving and his family hating me and losing the only person who'd ever made me feel worth loving. Saturday morning, Weston picked me up at 8 with coffee and my favorite muffin from the bakery near his apartment. He'd already loaded his car with supplies, including a cooler full of snacks and a playlist burned onto CDs because the mountain roads had spotty cell service. He talked the entire drive about how perfect everything would be while I stared out the window at trees getting thicker as we climbed elevation. The bed and breakfast was exactly like the pictures, with a wraparound porch and mountain views, and an older couple who greeted us like we were their own kids. Weston had told them it was our first trip together, and they upgraded us to their best room for free. The room had a massive bed with rose petals scattered across white sheets and champagne cooling in a silver bucket. Weston set down our bags and pulled me close and kissed my forehead, and said we could take everything slow. He suggested we go for a walk first to see the property, and I agreed because it meant delaying what came next. We hiked a short trail behind the property, and Weston held my hand the whole time, pointing out different birds and plants he'd researched. He'd brought a book about local wildlife and kept reading facts out loud about the ecosystem. At a scenic overlook, he pulled out his phone to take a selfie of us with the valley spread out behind. He said he wanted to remember this moment forever, and I wondered if he'd delete the photo after learning the truth. Back at the room, he suggested we shower and change for dinner, and I locked myself in the bathroom with the water running so he wouldn't hear me crying. I stayed in there for 20 minutes pretending to wash my hair while trying to stop shaking. When I finally came out, Weston had changed into the nice shirt he bought special for dinner and was sitting on the bed looking through the room service menu. He jumped up when he saw me and asked if I felt better, and I nodded, even though nothing felt better at all. We walked down to the dining room where other couples were already seated at candlelit tables, and the host gave us knowing smiles like we were newlyweds. Weston ordered wine even though he doesn't really drink and kept reaching across the table to hold my hand while we waited for our food. The couple next to us was celebrating their anniversary, and the wife kept talking about how special their first trip together was 20 years ago. Weston squeezed my fingers and mouthed, "That'll be us," and I had to look away at the mountain view to keep from crying again. Our food came, but I could barely eat the salmon I ordered because my stomach was in knots thinking about what would happen after dinner. Weston noticed I wasn't eating much and asked if I wanted to order something else, but I said I was just nervous, which made him smile and say he was nervous too, but in a good way. He paid the check and suggested we watch the sunset from the porch before going back to our room, and I agreed because it bought me more time. We sat on the porch swing while the sky turned orange and pink, and Weston put his arm around me and talked about how perfect everything was. Other guests walked by and smiled at us like we were this adorable young couple in love, which we were except for the massive lie sitting between us. When it got dark, Weston stood up and held out his hand and said, maybe we should head inside, and my legs felt weak as I followed him back to our room. He'd lit the candles while I was in the bathroom earlier, and the rose petals were still scattered on the bed, and the champagne was sitting there waiting. Weston turned on his playlist, and some slow song about first times and new love started playing while he walked over to me and gently touched my face. He kissed me soft and careful like I might break and whispered that we could stop anytime if I wasn't ready, and that's when I started crying for real. Not pretty tears, but ugly sobbing that made my whole body shake, while Weston held me and kept asking what was wrong. I tried to talk, but couldn't get words out between the gasps and hiccups, so he just rubbed my back and said it was okay, and we didn't have to do anything tonight. He thought I was overwhelmed by the pressure, but really I was drowning in 3 years of lies that were about to destroy the best thing in my life. When I finally stopped crying enough to breathe, Weston got me water and tissues and sat next to me on the bed without touching me, like he was afraid I'd start crying again. He asked if I wanted to talk about what was bothering me, and I knew this was it. The moment where I either told him or kept lying forever. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom asking how the trip was going and if I'd told him yet, and seeing her words made the decision for me. I turned to Weston and said there was something I needed to tell him about my past, and watched his face shift from concerned to confused. He said, okay, and waited while I tried to figure out how to start. And finally, I just said I hadn't been honest about never being with anyone before. His eyebrows went up, but he stayed quiet, so I kept going and told him about getting pregnant at 16, though I couldn't look at his face while I said it. The room felt too small and too quiet, except for that stupid playlist still playing songs about innocence and first love in the background. Weston reached over and turned off the music, and the silence was worse because now I could hear him breathing different, faster and shallow, like he was trying not to react. He asked how long ago this happened, and when I said 3 years, his face went pale as he did the math, and realized I'd been lying our entire relationship. He stood up and walked to the window, and I could see his hands shaking as he processed that the virgin girlfriend he'd been protecting and planning this special weekend for had given birth before they even met. Thanks for sticking with me through all these strange twists and turns today. Definitely made it more interesting sharing the questions together. Like the video, it helps more than you think.